Welcome to Jewish Cinematheque, where we meet some of the important faces involved with films that tackle aspects of the Jewish experience. Today we meet Israeli film director Michal Aviad, whose piercing and in many ways groundbreaking film, Working Woman, lays bare the issue of sexual harassment in the workplace in an extremely powerful way.
אורנה חביב, יופי של הבלנצה קיבל. אנחנו מחפשים מישהי עם ניסיון בנדל"ן שתעזור לי פה.
הנה, זה נראה לך זמן טוב ללמוד מקצוע חדש? מה אם זה לא יסתדר?
אופי, נתן לי צ'אנס.
מנהלת אדמיניסטרטיבית זה בעצם יד ימין שלי. אפשר להעיר משהו קטן? אני חושב שיכול מאוד להתאים לך בזום.
39 מעלות, לא ירדה לי מהידיים. היא עדיין חמה, שערי איתה.
מרגישה יותר טוב, נכון?
שיחקת אותה.
יצא לי, לא תכננתי.
מהיום אנחנו עובדים אצלה.
שכחתי, מאמי, שכחתי, סליחה. אני אדבר בשמחה. רגע. אוקיי, אז נדבר מחר, בסדר?
מה, אין לו חיים?
מיכאל ליביץ'.
נראה להם עד שבת.
אבל אני אעשה של מכה שתרים אותנו.
מרסי. היית מעולה היום. מבינה כמה כסף עשית, את קולטת? אוי.
תדליק את האור, בני.
תגידי, אורנה, אי אפשר לצחוק איתך?
את יודעת, אני מאוד השתדלתי לפרגן לך על הקריירה שלך והנסיעה לחו"ל. די, תתעוררי. נו!
אורנה, נכת. מי שירצה, תפסיק אותה.
Michal, welcome to Jewish Cinematheque.
Thank you.
I've been admiring your work for many years. You have charted a very unique direction in terms of the choice of the movies that you've made. You've always felt it was important to deal with women's issues, which is something we don't see a great deal of in Israeli cinema.
It's not that women's issues is what I'm doing. What I'm doing is general issues that concern society from the point of view of women, which is different. I mean, I have nothing against women's issues, but I don't deal with pregnancy or with issues that are exclusively women. I try to look at Israeli society mostly from the point of view of women, which makes the entire vision a little different. So if I look at war from women's point of view, it looks different.
In what way?
Women, in many ways, are the victims of heroism that men try to achieve. Women are the mothers and the wives and the daughters who have to keep society going while men are being heroes or when men are playing with war.
So classically, I mean, as far as I can go back in Israeli cinema, women have not been portrayed. Maybe a 1970, 69, 70 film like Matzor, like Siege.
That's right.
Which dealt with a woman and her place in society. Mm-hmm. But it's been
very seldom. It's very seldom because usually, very often, and that's in most societies, men are the directors and are the script writers. Most men, first of all, they make a film about father-son relationship. So 95% of the films in Israel and elsewhere are about father-son relationship. When they get over that, they start dealing with their army service, with their whatever. You know, people are close to themselves, and I don't blame them for that. We need to have more women as writers and directors because we are close to ourselves as well. So we can portray the same issues many times from our point of view.
And yet, Israel's such a male-dominant society that oftentimes I've seen even the women directors moving towards
It's true.
emulating the...
It's true. That's also true in America. When you think about the woman who got Academy Award, she got an Academy Award for a war film.
Right.
So it's very similar. Israel and the United States, Israel is really trying to imitate the United States. I don't know if consciously, but as much as possible. Israel much closer to the US than to Europe, even though half of its population came from Europe.
But if we look at women today in Israel, they are in combat, are they not?
They are in combat, some of them, and some of them are in combat, and some of them, of course, some of them are in combat, some of them are in all kinds of roles that they used to be male roles, but this is not where women really strive in Israeli society. For instance, in Israeli election, women are not in the first, in the roles that we see. I mean, there are maybe fifth or sixth or seventh in each party. They are not the leaders.
But we've seen women leaders. We've seen women even being potentially prime ministers. And
That's right. It happens, but it's very rare. And for many, many years, we always say, oh, there are women there. It doesn't mean the women are there. And there are always exceptions. You know, here there was a woman who was running for president. It doesn't mean that women are powerful in politics.
And then all the problems that are resulting around the fact that she is a woman.
Exactly.
You began your studies in San Francisco.
That's right.
Did that impact the way your vision and how you began to create your films? Your first film was Acting Our Age that you made back in 1987 when you were when you were an infant, aging among women. So you focused on. So tell us about that American impact.
Okay, I came to the United States in my 20s, and I went to San Francisco. In San Francisco, in the 1980s, were really volatile politically, and in terms of gay liberation, women's liberation. And I became a feminist right away.
You weren't in Israel?
I was already political in terms of Palestinian-Israeli issues, but I didn't know how to relate those to women's issues. So, and I was 28 when I made this film about women who are 65 and older. And I made that film because I was a waitress at a restaurant in San Francisco. And there was this guy who asked me how old I was, and I said 28, and he said, oh, you look great for your age. And I realized that if at 28 I look great for my age, this is probably the compliment I'm going to get for the rest of my life. I better figure out what it means to be old. So that was my first film. And from then on, I made always films again, from a woman's point of view, again, not about women's issues, but from the point of view of women.
So a few years later, you made The Woman Next Door, where
That's
you
right,
focused
it has to be women, Palestinian and Israeli women, and their relationship to the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza.
In the course of your work, have you ever had a situation where someone said, you can't go there, you can't make that film, you can't do this, you can't do that?
Quite often, but luckily, so far, I was able to I got funding for my first two films in the United States. But from then on, I started receiving funding from public foundations in Israel in competition, exactly like every other filmmaker. And luckily, the films I made were either strong enough, or I was already a good enough filmmaker, or I was the only one who was dealing with women, but I always got funding. And I was able to make the films. It was always a struggle, but most filmmakers are going through a struggle.
So you never felt that it was an anti-woman bias or that your films were too political?
I did feel that, but I said that finally I received the money.
Great. And you've been so successful ever since. You made a choice, I guess, early on to make nonfiction documentary films.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, in 2011, you found two of the most dynamic Israeli actors, Ronit Elkabetz and Evgenia Dodina. And you made a film called Invisible. Why did you shift at that point from documentary
I'll
filmmaking?
tell you. I started making documentaries because I really wanted to have one foot in art and one foot in society. And I believe that that was the way I could do it through documentaries. When I came to Invisible, which is a film about a real event of a serial rapist, the first famous serial rapist in Israel, who raped quite a few women. And the story is about two women who met then at the time of the rape at the police station when they were giving testimony, and they meet again 30 years later. And I wanted to deal with what does it mean like a long-term trauma, and how long trauma, I mean, these rapes were like life-threatening, like real horrible rapes. And I wanted to deal with how this trauma comes up 30 years later and the way it affects these women. There was no way I could do it in documentary form because I couldn't like follow a rape victim and hope that her trauma will arise. So that
will be erased, just completely just.
That's right.
It just.
So that's why I decided to, it's a film that mixes documentary and fiction in the sense that it brings back the testimonies from the time in documentary form, but the present day is acted by Ronit Elkabetz, who is not with us anymore, unfortunately, and by Evgenia Dodina. And so I made this kind of a mix, and that was my first attempt.
And the reception?
The film got many prizes. The film was, critically, it was a success. In the theaters in Israel, it didn't go that well, and I didn't understand at the time why wouldn't people Saturday night go out to see a film about rape. Now getting older, I start to understand it.
Which is?
They want to have a good time.
You just want to escape.
I'm not blaming anybody. It's just it's a difficult film.
Has it helped the debate, the discussion, the conversation?
Absolutely.
In what way?
I mean, it's still going around a lot in the world and in Israel, and with this debate about that we are in it still about what trauma is and how it manifests itself, and how come 30 years later, we just saw it now in the United States with Kavanaugh, and it's how come 30 years later things come up from somebody's soul and start to bother and not allow her to go on with her life.
Yeah, we also just saw it with a U.S. senator who came forward and said she was raped in the service.
That's right. That's right. We see it all the time now. And now we are starting to have a bit more sort of tendency to be tolerant to these facts and to understand that the human soul is the human soul. I mean, you do it. I mean, Invisible came out exactly when two very well done and famous Israeli films were made, Waltz with Bashir and Lebanon, which dealt also exactly with the same issue, with the trauma that comes up 30 years after the fact. And, it happens to soldiers too. And we have to be aware of it. We have to understand it. if we want to do anything about it.
And was anything done about it? Was there new legislation? I mean, we've seen over the years, and I know that in the case of some of your films, it's not only raised conversation, but changed certain ways of dealing with things. How did Invisible?
I don't know. I mean, listen, I'm not that powerful that I can change legislation.
But film can be a very powerful medium.
Of course. Legislation, both in the United States, in Europe, and in Israel, is being changed around rape and sexual harassment every few years since the 1990s. And every time it's in a different place, meaning now I don't know the facts for sure, but exactly, but I know that the time that a woman can complain about rape has been extended.
In Israel?
In Israel and in the United States and in Europe. So that's one of the things that film, which is sort of is the zeitgeist of our era, was able to do. The same things happened with sexual harassment, which just was invented in the 1990s, meaning we didn't know. I'm older than 1990, and I was a feminist. The concept of sexual harassment didn't occur to me.
You mean it was just okay for men to treat women in a certain way?
I didn't say it was okay. We were blind to it. It doesn't say that it's okay. We're blind to the phenomena as a systematic phenomena. We're also blind to rape within the family. Only recently, the Ayers rape that is written in the Bible. I mean, in the Old Testament, rape is a crime when it's done in these circumstances. Over the years, in the 20th century and now, slowly, we understand that rape is a much wider phenomena than meeting some stranger on the street. A husband raping his wife was not a crime until very recently. So all of us change.
So let's jump ahead to this incredible film that you've just made called Working Woman. Mm-hmm. There had been a movement in Israel a few years back, actually predated the Me Too movement.
That's right.
One on one?
One from one.
One of one.
One of one.
Right. And did that affect what?
Yeah, I think, again, in 1998, a new law was introduced and accepted in Israel against sexual harassment. That law is very progressive. It's as progressive or more progressive than the US law or the French law. And that law 20 years ago brought into the consciousness the idea of sexual harassment, and all of a sudden, every woman realized that she was sexually harassed, or almost every woman. And so that was one. So basically, from the beginning of the 21st century, the idea and testimonies are there all the time. In Israel, it started already in the first in the first years of 2000. A few people were already convicted with sexual harassment. Some generals.
Convicted and actually sent to jail?
Yes, generals. We understood how prevalent it is in the army. In the army, because in the army there are women who are 18 and 20 years old and officers who can be much older and have much more power. We understood how prevalent it is in the police. We understood how prevalent it is elsewhere. In 2011, a president in Israel was convicted of rape. Probably he's the first president on earth. And I assume that there were other presidents in Europe, in Israel, elsewhere in the United States who raped women. Nobody ever convicted them. So all of a sudden, Israel was the first one. So Israel is very aware of these issues, and the women's movement in Israel is struggling very hard on these issues and is relatively successful, relatively. I think that from many different complaints, and radio people and television people were convicted with sexual harassment, and from that the One of One movement came into being. And that movement, very similar to Me Too, all they asked was to give an anonymous testimony on Facebook. Within a week, they had 1,000 testimonies.
Wow.
Slowly, they started to deal with testimonies and check whether there is one harasser for different testimonies. And they became, it's all basically the social media kind of issue, but they are really still working really amazingly to deal with these issues. And
So
there
your
wasn't
film just sort of, you know,
it was totally, my film was totally part of what was going on in Israel at the time. I met, so I read all these testimonies. I met attorneys who specialize in defending victims of sexual harassment at work. And they told me mind-boggling stories about, for instance, Israel is a country of immigration, like this one, like the United States. So they told me about, for instance, the one thing that I couldn't forget is about this woman who was an immigrant from probably Eastern Europe, who was here already for like 10 years, and she was
in Israel.
in Israel, I mean. She worked in a kitchen in some institution, some place, and she was sure that and every day at lunchtime, the boss would have sex with her. She had 4 children to raise, and she just took it as part of her job. So amazing things are happening, and we don't know about them. So,
you know, in the film, you know, we have this very vivacious and very capable young woman who's given an opportunity by her former officer in the army, and she's strong, and yet it seems that the pressures of the workplace work against her.
When we wrote the script, Sharon, Eyal, Azulay, Michal Aviad, and myself, we wanted to make Orna, the protagonist, as similar to who we are as possible. So we decided to make her intelligent, intelligent, high-functioning, ambitious, and with this, and we said, okay, and the situation is that she is a mother of 3. She needs to work exactly like we do, because all women we know need to work. And she's ambitious. She wants to have a work that has some kind of a meaning. And that's the character we designed. And then we put this character in the workplace, and we try to see how long can this boss make advances at her, and what kind of a struggle she would go into, because she has so much to lose. So, and that's how the story evolved. We try to leave it in the gray area as long as possible.
The brilliance of the film often is in the lack of dialogue and just watching the body language and the extended shots that you often choose to make without a word being said.
So, okay, so I think that was actually, I wanted to make the film because I read all these testimonies, but I really needed to see it in order to understand it. That was my motivation. But when I went for funding, after we wrote the script, the funders didn't want to give me money. They said, there is no drama in it. Why don't you do like a real rape? or do a real attack, something violent, you know. We want something that is dramatic.
Male funders?
Yeah, of course. And I couldn't explain to them that I wanted to see the bodies on the screen in order to get it. Finally, when we got the funding, all I tried to do in this film is to try to understand all that has to do with sexual harassment that is not in the words. The proximity of the bodies.
By the way, you made a conscious decision when you say the body's on the screen. We never see any nudity. It's always very, you know, very carefully.
Yeah. I didn't feel that in my films, I don't want to turn people on. I really don't. I know it sells tickets. I was already told in my previous film that I should show rape visually because sex and violence sell tickets magnificently. But I'm not, you know, I'm not this kind of filmmaker. So for me, cinema is, of course, light and movement, but it's also bodies. Because all we have on the screen, unless we're at the National Geographic, we have human bodies. And for me, how they stand, how they walk, their movements, I understand tension is in the body as much as it is in the face.
אורנה, תסתכלי עליי. אני מפחיד אותך. אנחנו עובדים טוב ביחד, לא? אני מבטיח לך. מבטיח. לא סומכת עליי? בואי נמשיך. תראי שאנחנו נשכח מזה הרבה יותר ממה שאת חושבת.
You know, I sat there and I watched this film, and I, you know, at a certain point, even though I wasn't seeing anything, I wanted to cover my eyes. It's such a powerful film.
Thank you.
Really raise such an important issue, and in such a, and it's not just the bad guy, her boss, but it's also the relationship with her husband, and his own expectations of where his wife should be and what she should or should not be doing. It's quite powerful, and I just must tell you, I congratulate you and I wish you much success.
Thank you.
So, Michal, thank you so much for joining us today, and I look forward to future films and hopefully for the American public to be watching this beautifully crafted work.
I very much hope so. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double high or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.